Tell me when it's off. Put our mics on. Are we live? Ladies and gentlemen, dude.
This is really happening.
You're the first guest.
Come on.
Live on stream. Guys, welcome to the broadcast. We both feel weird because we're used to controlling everything. And right now we can't see ourselves. We're not controlling anything. And we almost had a heart attack because our audio was off synced. We had everything go wrong for like 3 hours. So spam 1 in the chat. Are we good? Can they hear us? Type 1 if you can hear us. Something's doubling? You're hearing the audio twice? Type 1 if you can hear us. We're still working this out, guys.
Yeah, come on. Everybody, I still want you to share. Throw a thumbs up on this thing.
That's okay if you're hearing us twice. They're not. They're good. Can you guys hear us twice? Okay, we're good. Whoo, here we are.
We're going to do this thing.
Dude, we've been 12. It's so weird to sit down and talk. I feel like a different person.
Yeah.
I'm used to looking at you at a screen, but we've been doing this 12 hours a day for 2 weeks now. Shout out to my dad who helped me.
Come on.
Shout out to my wife who's going to be on the podcast. She's standing right behind the camera.
Yes,
She's going to be on the podcast tomorrow night for the first time in 3 years, and it's going to be amazing. And shout out to my brother who's running all the cameras, all the angles, all the lights, all the sound and stuff. Let me know what you guys think about the new studio. I feel like this is my baby, so I feel like I'm really insecure. Like they're not gonna like it. Like I just brought my kid on stream and they're like, we don't like your son.
I don't think they're gonna like it. I think they're loving it. I want to see some comments. So let us know. This is a huge accomplishment.
It's crazy.
People don't understand. I'm gonna say this on your behalf. Okay.
Okay. We got time, so go ahead.
Yeah. This is hundreds of hours. You said 12 hours. That's totally a lie. I mean, it's like hundreds of hours turning knobs, pushing buttons, and all it really reveals is how much you love every single one of the people that are a part of your stream. For real. This is a labor of love. And yeah, look, this is epic. Studio's
Someone
fire.
saying it's choppy. Refresh your feed. We're in 4K 60. So
yeah,
it is really high bit rate. So we're trying to do our best here. It's our first time with this crazy bit rate. So refresh your feed if it's blurry or put HD. You know what's crazy? People don't put it on HD and then they're like, it's blurry.
Right.
So I'm like, oh, well, it's not
yeah,
HD.
you guys actually have the option to put it in HD.
Yeah, and I hear sirens behind us because the door's open. So that's all good. All right, guys, come on the chat. We're about to hit 2,000. This is the studio reveal. We are in 4K. If you're on your laptop, put it on 4K. We spent a lot of money. We're like $20,000+ worth of cameras for 4K. So make sure you guys hit the thumbs up. If you're watching this on your phone, like the video. There's no Carl, there's no Bird. We just need you guys to like the video. Okay, now we're in HD. Okay, look, see, they just weren't in HD. We have huge screens in front of us with all the comments. So we were like, maybe we'll look at each other, but we're probably just gonna talk to you guys all night long and share with you guys because we're streamers, so it feels natural to do this.
And that's all right. I want you guys to be able to see the individual pores of my face. I want you to judge my skincare routine. That if it's not in 4K, you're doing it wrong. Your phone, your iPad, your television. As a matter of fact, what you guys should do is tag us and let us know like where you're watching from in the comments right now. But I want to see their world because they're seeing your world right now.
Yeah, it's weird.
I want to see your living rooms, your televisions, your iPads, your phones, whatever you're watching on, and make sure it's in 4K.
And someone says 1440p. Maybe YouTube is not picking up 4K. I don't know. We're gonna find out after. This is our first time going live.
Yeah.
So we're gonna find out after. Our computer almost caught fire like 5 times earlier. Guys,
There's
we've been
smoke
here
coming out of it right now.
We've been here 3 hours trying to get this going, and it's like, and this is not including all the hours before we've been working on this. And then all of a sudden the computer's not working, the mics were off-centered, the cameras were. But now here we are.
Yeah.
So we're excited. We're on episode 100, and make sure we hit record as well. I'm not controlling anything, so I'm like, what do I do with my hands? We're on episode 127 of the Revival Lifestyle Podcast, and our first guest at the new studio.
Come on.
We're live in person.
The favor of God is strong on me, everybody.
Not on a screen. So to all the other demon slayers out there, I don't know what to tell you guys.
Favor's not fair.
Apostle Pagani, Pastor Vlad, they're up in here. We love you guys and appreciate you guys.
I love you guys so much.
But man, what a great time. We're excited. It's going to be a really, really good night. We have a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
I recently heard a portion of your testimony and realized I didn't even know your testimony. Yeah. So I'm like, I want to bring your testimony tonight. I want people to see the other side of you. We're going to talk about trauma that you went through, how to overcome that. We're going to talk about what's happening in this new age movement that's exploding. We're going to do air quotes. And then what God is doing with deliverance. We just had literally... Look at Apostle Pagani's in the chat. Alexander Pagani, what's up, bro?
Hey.
Literally on Saturday, we did 7 hours of deliverance service in Visalia, California. no breaks in between, just absolutely straight deliverance. And then we did 7 hours on Sunday. He preached at my church, Life Song. So what did you think of my church?
Well, first of all, there were cars backed up 4 or 5 blocks all the way to the highway. I mean, this is no exaggeration. Hundreds of people sitting on the floor, young people being baptized in the Holy Spirit. Come on, drop a comment if you were actually there. But it was off the charts. 4 services, 8 hours of ministry, demons cast out, medically verifiable miracles. I mean, it's been a wild weekend.
Yeah.
But from Visalia to Stockton to this, I mean, it's a lot of ministry.
Yeah.
And tonight's going to be special. This stream's going to be different. We're going to go deep. We're going to talk about my story, but my story becomes your testimony. It's a prophecy for what God can do through your life.
Yeah.
So make sure you guys stick around all the way till the end. Do you think we'll get to Q&A?
I don't know. We're going to try to do Q&A.
I may have promised it in the chat.
We're going to try to do Q&A. I know we're going to, we want to go into his testimony. Even some of my kids are here. I'm like, all right, go to the room. We're going to go to the testimony. Some of this stuff will be graphic, but I want it to be real. I want it to be raw. I know some of you are saying the stream's cutting out. It's going in. Just refresh. We'll figure it out. Someone said it's buffering a lot. It might be because of the high bit rate. We're running a really high bit rate. So on Facebook, it might be cutting off. Yeah, it keeps cutting out on Facebook. But stay with us and just refresh, and that's all good. It was historic on Sunday, so you don't know this, but it was our biggest Sunday we've ever had. We literally, like he said, had cars lined up on the freeway. It was like we had nowhere to put people. We had people sitting all over the floor. In Stockton, California, I'm telling you, there's a revival happening, miracles, signs, wonders, deliverance. And so I was super honored to have Pastor Mike at our church. It was just amazing. We just could not get enough of what God is doing with your ministry, with what you're preaching, what you're sharing. I've heard you preach a bunch of times. It was absolutely the most powerful I've ever heard you preach before. I told your wife that on Instagram. I'm like, this was the best. She's like, well, of course, he's the best preacher. But here's what I told Mike. I'm like, how are you going to come up in my church, out-preach me, pack the building out more? I had some of my team like, Isaiah, it's more packed than when you preach. I was like... It's like, y'all better watch it.
You know what, though? No, listen, that was my gift to you because I feel like you carry so many events and so many things. And so, you know what I mean? It's good. I can be the Scottie Pippen to the Michael Jordan.
I was shouting you down. So I didn't sit down for 3 of the services. I stood up the whole time. I was shouting. I had no voice. I woke up the next day with no voice, my chest hurting, not from preaching, from actually shouting you down. I told my wife, I was like, I think I'm more energy exerted with you preaching and shouting for 4 services. So it's just been an absolutely amazing weekend, amazing time. I'm super excited to have you for the first episode of our new studio.
Yeah, it's an honor to be here.
It's been
for
amazing.
real. It is. It's an honor to be here. And I mean, just looking at all the comments, you guys have so many memories that you've made with Isaiah along the way. And I think this is like a new beginning. It's a new season in another era. I mean, it's the best of everything you've done, but there's so much more. And so I believe the conversations that come from this environment are going to literally change the world.
I love it.
People say that, but God's given you a vision. And you're such a huge inspiration to me. I mean, you told me, 2 years ago, you need to go after YouTube, you need to do this, and you've been driving it. So even what we saw Sunday at your home church was really you reaping off of what you sowed in my life, because the people who showed up, they would have never even known to show up unless you pushed me for more.
It's awesome.
So this is it.
Yeah, it's been amazing to see everything grow and all of us together. It's just been an absolutely amazing time. Some of the Demon Slayers up in the chat here, we've just had a really good time. What God is doing, and this is January, so we're like one day before January is over, we're able to launch this. Again, we've been here 2 weeks, like 12 hours a day. We get here at 9 a.m. We leave like 10 p.m. My dad, shout out to my dad in the chat, has helped me out tremendously. And then also, if you guys don't know the story of the studio, we were going to do a GoFundMe because I'm like, I just don't have an extra $30,000 sitting around. Actually ended up being double, but we were like, we have buy all this equipment and lighting and cameras, and we're going to optimize it and get it all worked out as best as we can. It's our first night. But somebody actually emailed me while I was talking to someone about launching a GoFundMe and sent $30,000.
Come on.
So they're watching right now. So thank you. They don't want me to say their name, but they paid $30,000 towards the studio, towards the cameras, towards the lighting. And so it's been a long journey, but we're excited. My wife will be on tomorrow night, so we're able to get her on. And usually I can't fit more than one person on my other setup. So to have multiple people on this setup, we actually have up to 4 people, is really, really cool. Okay. With all that being said, that was the intro. Are we still going? Is the computer on fire? There's no smoke or flames coming out. So I know some of you said it's still choppy. Just refresh. You'll be fine. It'll work out good. Some of you, if you don't have really fast internet, we're running like really high bit rate. So we're looking at the comments. If you see us just staring like this, that's us looking at the comments. We were like, we probably won't even look at each other. We'll probably just stare at the comments all the time. But without further ado, episode 127 of the Revival Lifestyle Podcast, Pastor Mike Signorelli. Pastor Mike, let's talk about your testimony.
Yeah.
You have all these people following. They're coming to the services. You did the Domino Revival Tour, which I want to talk about as well. You're preaching all over. You have one of the fastest growing churches in America for multiple years. Like, everybody knows you're successful. They see the crowds, they see the numbers, but not a lot of people know your story.
Yeah.
And one thing that I've gotten caught into is when we're out preaching, we assume everyone knows our story. So even me, I'm like, I have videos of my testimony. I have stories over and over. So I don't hardly ever share my testimony. And one pastor's like, dude, it's not your story, it's God's story. And if you don't share it, you're robbing people that encounter they could have by hearing and building faith in your story. So I don't share my testimony enough. Now I'm trying to share it more. So I would love let's dive into your testimony, talk about how you got called into the ministry, how you fled into atheism. You went off into atheism for a little while, came back. You went into lukewarm Christianity for a while, came back. You've come a long way to where you are now. And so I want to dive in just growing up from the beginning, and then I'll ask you questions in between, and we'll have some dialogue and talk, and I'm super excited about it.
Yeah. Well, there's something about testimony that becomes prophecy.
Come on.
And so for me, I've gleaned from other people's stories, and when you hear where they come from, it really empowers you. And so for those of you who are listening right now and you're like, why would I listen to this guy's story? It's because my story becomes your story, or my past is your past, but also my present can become your future. So God's going to do some amazing things through this. And thank you for giving me this opportunity, because it is weird how people see me now, and when they hear my testimony, they're like, yeah, when I hear you preach, it's like, I didn't know where you came from. And they're like, oh, I thought you had a good life. I thought that you had like the classic American family or whatever that is. And so I'm ready to dive in.
And when I hear your story, I'm like, if God can do it in your life with your upbringing, and you shared a little bit, we probably won't share the full details of what you shared with me the other night, but I'm like, man, if God can take you from the background you had, and I had the opposite story. Like, I didn't have any trauma, any abuse. Like, my family was just the golden Christian family, yet I still ended up becoming an atheist. I still ended up off there. But I think about, man, so many people can resonate thinking, well, you had it all together. That's why you're a pastor. But in reality, you had a pretty wild upbringing. I know your mom is watching. We're going to be respectful towards everything we talk about and say, but I would love for you just to jump in and start talking about your childhood and kind of how you grew up.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I was just born in Northwest Indiana, so I always tell everybody I'm like half hillbilly, half city slicker.
Doolittle.
So my nickname's Doolittle, just to give everybody an idea, like old school Loretta Lynn, Johnny Cash. Like, my mom's side of the family are just straight hillbillies, or they would say mountaineers because they're from West Virginia. So then my dad's side of the family, they're hardcore Catholics, Italian, from Sicily, actually. So Sicilian and Italian. And, that's kind of, so my parents had a really, terrible marriage, and it ended in divorce very early on. And so my earliest memories were actually me having to go between like one house to the other house, like joint custody. So if anybody is listening to this, like the how devastating divorce can be. And so I just had a super traumatic beginning, and I tell people, if you study like brain development, birth to 8 years old is a very crucial point in your life.
Yes.
And so if you want to find out like what the plan of God is for your life, look at how Satan tried to sabotage it from birth to 8 years old.
Wow.
Because wherever there's perversion, there's purpose. Wherever there's pain, there's purpose, because the enemy's revealing how significant your life really is because of how he's attacking. And so, all these years later, Julie and I have videos with 1 million views, 250,000 views about marriage. And, but that was where the brokenness started, was my mom and dad's marriage ending in divorce when I was just 1 year old. And so we have a marriage ministry, but I came out of a broken marriage. And so anyway, birth till 8 years old was just a lot of trauma.
Yeah.
And so this is something you guys can look up in the news reports. But my father actually committed murder.
Wow.
And that's what ended the joint custody, because he went away to jail, and then my mother had full custody of me.
Wow.
And so she got remarried, and I've got 4 siblings as a result of her being remarried. And there was just, my mom's trying to figure it out. But the thing is, in every family, I believe that there's someone destined to be a breaker. Somebody, that Moses that says like, it may run in my family, but I'm where it runs out. And I want to honor my mom because she really is the Moses. And she's the one who said, I'm going to get free. I'm going to, so my mom's story is like, we don't have enough time for that, but she was kind of raised in like Nazarene churches and kind of like religious churches. Yeah. But my mom at a certain point was like, I think there's more. And she started reading the book of Acts and went back to a Nazarene church and was like, why is this not happening? Like, why are we not speaking in tongues? Why are we not seeing healings? Why are demons not being cast out? And basically the pastor said that stuff doesn't happen today. And my mom refused to believe that. And so she went back and started playing her piano and singing, and spontaneously was baptized in the Holy Spirit. Wow. Spontaneously started speaking in tongues. And so she was like that godly heritage. And even though there was divorce, there was trauma, there was pain, she knew like God could work this out. He can turn this around for our good. So my earliest memories were my mom, and this is so crazy because, we're in this set right now, we're doing this live stream, I'm telling my testimony, but my greatest experiences with God in my childhood were not in a church, even though we went to church every Sunday. Wow. It was in our living room. Wow. Because I remember my mom saying like, we're going to read the Bible. And she like literally making me and my brothers and sisters, okay, it's your turn, Doolittle. That was my nickname. Now you have to share the word. Now it's your turn, Sam. Now it's your turn, Sarah. And what I didn't realize is that she was training up warriors.
Come on.
But she just knew back in the day, and I want to say this, there, back in the 80s and 90s, like there was no such thing as like going to counseling. Yeah. People did it, but it wasn't as popular as it was today. So my mom really was like, I know we're messed up. I know there's a lot of brokenness, but we're just going to get into the scriptures. We're going to pray together. Like that was our therapy. Wow. Our therapy was worship. Our therapy was the word. And so that was kind of my childhood.
And you talked about growing up in a trailer park. Yeah. You said something in your sermon. You're like, I grew up in a trailer park, but I never knew we didn't have much. Like I didn't know as a kid we were poor because we had the presence of God. And I thought about, man, there's so many people out there that are like financially not well off, yet they're like, I can't do what God's called me to do because I don't have finances or money or wealth. Yet you guys had in a trailer park the presence of God. And you had the move of the Spirit, and your mom trained you and raised you. And I'm like, man, how many of us are well off? How many of us in the chat have finances or money, yet we're not raising our kids in the ways of the Lord? In fact, I would say it's harder when you have money and stuff to raise your kids in God because there's so much distraction. And yet you guys didn't grow up with much, but you had the presence of God in your family. And many young parents watching this, like, man, even me and my wife, we're trying so hard this year to pour into our kids, to pray with our kids, to read with our kids. And it's not easy because there's so much distraction and so much the world offers. And you have Christians in Iran that are like, it's way harder being a Christian in America than Iran because we don't have all the distractions, all the gadgets, all the gizmos. So I love when you said that because I think there's a lot of people that think because they don't have finances, they can't be like powerful for God or raise their kids in the ways of the Lord. Yet you were like, dude, I was in a trailer park. Yet the presence of God was showing up in that trailer park. So maybe people see you, they don't realize that. But God was using that time to develop you and to train you. And then to think like, don't think your 6-year-old's insignificant or your 8-year-old or your 10-year-old. Like, well, when they get to be a teenager, God can use them. Yet this is the most pivotal time to pour into them and for God to do things.
And that's the thing is like, so I come from humble beginnings. Yeah. And my mom worked in a grocery store and she was a single mom. And we lived in a trailer park in South Chicago, Northwest Indiana area. And I was just exposed to the presence of God. And I remember the glory of God coming down. And I remember, even when we moved out of that trailer into like kind of like a house, and we weren't in the projects, but we were literally right down the street from the projects. Just to give you an idea, like geographically, we were right down the street from the projects in like a small house. But I remember the glory of God coming down, and I remember crying and weeping and just experiencing the presence of God. And it's funny how now that I'm older, I look back and I realize like how poor we really were. But I didn't at the time have a sense of it because we had Jesus and it felt like we had everything. And so and you know what? It's funny because it's better to have Jesus first and then add unto that than try to add Jesus on top of all the material wealth. And I think a lot of families, they're trying to prioritize like, well, I'm going to get a house. And it's weird how like we make a place for our couch, but we never make a place for Jesus. We make a place for our, you know what I mean? Like I'm going to hang my TV right here, but it's like, where are you building your altar? And I remember my mom saying that to us, like, guys, we're going to build an altar. And we of course didn't make a physical altar. I know there's people listening right now,
like I'm going to go build an altar.
It's a spiritual thing. Yeah. Like she was saying, we're going to build an altar in this home. And so, matter of fact, there were times, and I'm just going to go deep, but my mom has been married multiple times. Yeah. And she's open about her story. And each time she met a guy who pretended to be a Christian and in that dating phase or whatever was kind of like acting the part, but then, it would come out who he really was. And so my mom has multiple divorces. It's something she talks about openly. But what would happen was like when you're here in America, when you get on social services like welfare, food stamps, all that stuff back in the day, there would be a gap because it's like she would get married, we would be doing all right for a little while, and then domestic abuse, violence, all that stuff would happen, and then there would be a divorce, and then there's a gap where you don't qualify for social services because it looks like you still have finances. And so my childhood, there were times where I went to bed hungry. There were times where there were like whole seasons where we ate out of like food pantries, and the local church people would come and try to feed us and stuff. And that was just part of my story. Wow. And so I think now all these years later, and this is what blows my mind, Isaiah, it's like, and it makes me want to cry even saying it out loud because I haven't really shared my story like this. Yeah. But it's like, we now feed hundreds and hundreds of families out of our campuses. I mean, we have food lines and around the block in Brooklyn every single month. And it was like, in one lifetime, I went from eating out of a pantry to actually birthing pantries across America. And, I tell the story too, like growing up, I did unfortunately have some Christmases without presents. And I remember waking up and it's like not getting anything. Yeah. And it really, it marks you, know? But see, anytime something like that happens, you have an opportunity to be bitter or to get better. And I was like, I'm not going to be, I remember making up my mind, like, I'm not going to be bitter. Life's more than this stuff. And so now we do a Christmas program every year through our church where we provide literally thousands of kids Christmas that wouldn't have Christmas. And so I think it's like wherever you hurt the most, that is where you carry the most empathy.
That's so good.
And so it's like, I remember coming into New York City after I launched the church many years later, obviously, and thinking like, there's kids living in shelters in New York City who are about to have my story. And how could I rewrite their story because of my pain? And people even told me like, oh, New York City, shelters, they'll never let a church in, blah, blah, blah. And we just reached out to them and we're like, hey, we've got people who will provide Christmas for families. And is it possible that some of these families won't have Christmas? And they're like, yeah, many of them won't. Wow. And we're like, now it's crazy. We've been doing this for the last 4 years, and I roll into those shelters now, and like the directors are like, it's Papa Sigs, and they're hugging me and all the kids and the families, and I was like, wow. But here's the thing: if I could go back in my story, and say, could I change it to where now you do have Christmas presents? I would actually, knowing what I know now, I would say no, like let young Mike Signorelli go without because he's going to go without. There's going to be thousands that won't.
Wow.
So it's like, here's the thing. Here's why I'm telling my story. Because if you will allow God to continue to work it out, I'm telling you, you will go back and say, I wouldn't even change it if I could now because of what he extracted from it. I feel the anointing all over this right now.
So do I. I'm trying not to say wow and so good every single word because the chat's gonna be like, dude, every word you say wow. But I'm literally like starting to be like, I'm going to start Lou Engle rocking right now.
But here's the thing about it. It's like, would you rather have the sermon or the Christmas present?
It's good.
You know what I mean? Like, would you rather have the ministry?
You're convicting me.
Yeah, it's like, because there's a time in my life where it's like, I'm at the point now where it's like, I'd rather have the testimony.
Yeah.
I'd rather have the book. I'd rather have the sermon. I'd rather have the ministry. Because, and I don't know why those things happen. My mom made mistakes. I made mistakes. But I remember my mom having such low self-esteem going all the way back to my past.
Yeah.
And really, my mom and I, I believe that we are spirits put into like dirt bodies. You know what I mean? Like God breathed my mom's spirit into that body and then breathed my spirit into this body. But I believe that family carries so much purpose.
Yeah.
It's not accidental.
Absolutely.
And so I remember my mom having so much low self-esteem. And the more we would increase in the things of God, it was like I would see stuff in her. She would see stuff in me. You know, that whole iron sharpens iron.
Yeah.
And because I'm the oldest. And so I'm the experiment. I'm the first kid.
Yeah.
Like she didn't know what she was doing. I didn't know what I was doing. But we were learning the things of God. And as I began to mature in the things of God, I remember there came this point when I was like 14 or 15 years old where I looked at my mom because her name's Sandra.
Okay.
And I remember telling her, I was like, Mom, I know that you've had multiple marriages. I know that there were times where we didn't have Christmas. I know that there were times where we literally went to bed hungry. I know there were times where the heat went off and we just literally doubled up our blankets and that was it. And I was like, but you gave me Jesus, so therefore you gave me everything. And I said, so from today on, I'm going to call you Moses for the rest of your life.
Wow.
And I was like, I told my mom, I said, I want this to be a prophetic reminder to you. And I said, you're Moses and I'm Joshua. I'll take us to Canaan, but we're going to go there together. And I'm like, you got us out of Egypt and I'll get us to Canaan. And that I remember making a deal with my mom. And I was like, because my mom was like so low self-esteem. She used to walk looking down at the ground, but the crazy thing is she led worship powerfully. She was a powerful preacher. Me and her found deliverance together, but she didn't have confidence. So now what's crazy is it's been all these years later. I literally never call my mom or Sandra. It's Moses. Because it was like I wanted to break that low self-esteem off of her. Now we've got this crazy, massive church, multi-site, national church, international, and everyone knows her as Moses. And that's what she preached last Sunday, threw down or whatever.
I'm going to have you also share a story you shared with us about what happened with her and the prophecy that came to pass. I just think about your guys' story. I mean, do you ever look at the church and all the success God has given you and all that God is doing and be like, how did we get here, Mom? Because you guys are super close, obviously. Yeah. But like, man, we went from this broken childhood. Your dad, if those that are just jumping on, a bunch of people just jumped on here. Your dad goes to prison for murder. Pretty much don't have him in your life ever. And here you and your mom are just making it happen in the trailer park. Revival's happening. And it's super convicting because you look at like even the parable of the wedding banquet where Jesus says, you didn't want to come because you're too busy. Like we're too busy with all our stuff. And they said, oh, I had an oxen I got to trial. I just bought property. I just bought a house. I just got a new job. And Jesus goes like, man, your priorities are so out of whack. And I think in America, our priorities for our children are get a good job, go to college, have a good career. And then Jesus is like the 9th, 10th thing down. Yeah, and then what happens is our kids grow up and they become teenagers and we're like, I don't know why our kids don't want Jesus. Like maybe because you raised them that way. Maybe we raised our kids, like you said, we have a place for the couch and the TV, but no place for prayer, no place for the altar, no place for revival in our homes. And I hope people are being challenged right now to be like, man, I have one shot at this and I want to raise my kids in the Lord. I want to raise them on fire for God. I want to raise them with an altar. I want to raise them up in the ways of the Lord. And so your story is just so crazy because I'm like, from that to where you're at now. Again, why I wanted to talk about this tonight, there's a million topics we can talk about. I wanted to talk about your testimony is people watch you and don't know this.
Right.
Like people don't know. They just think, oh, he's always been successful. He's always had this. He's always had that. But you're like, dude, I climbed from the bottom. God rose me up, worked all things together. Like even the bad things, God goes, I'm going to work that out for your good. Yeah. And how crazy is that the devil will come, give you the worst childhood possible, yours or somebody else's, doesn't matter who it is. Some people watching this have been abused, have been molested, have been raped, and you could have the worst childhood and God says, I'm going to turn around and use it and use you as a voice and raise you up. And so for those watching that are like, oh, God can never use you. Listen, I was an atheist. He's talking about his childhood. He became an atheist, which we'll talk about later, and God used him. So anybody watching this, there's hope for every single person. But like you have to have an urgency to say, now's the day I'm going to start. Yes. Now's the day I'm going to start being on fire. And I have a memory, I get all emotional talking about, but being a kid and seeing my parents pray in tongues, walk around the room. I just have a vivid memory of being probably 2-3 years old, but I thought about how these spiritual things our parents do mark us and how they carry with us through life. So I thought that was important to say, because people watching don't think it matters that their kids see them pray. They don't think it matters that their kids see them read the Bible. They don't think it matters, but it matters that your kids see you pray. It matters that your kids see you worship. So let's bring this into the home. So here you are now. You're this kid. How did you get into deliverance? What age were you? You've been in a lot longer than a lot of us. I think I said, I was like, man, you've been doing deliverance since the 80s. You're like, bro, I'm not that old. Not the 80s, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. Even though they call you Papa Sigs, you're not that old. But it's actually been since the 90s you got into deliverance.
The late 90s,
the
early
late 90s.
2000s.
So talk to us a little bit about, you're growing up, you're getting older. I also want you to share about how you invited someone to your church and they were like, where's the pastor? And you're like this young kid. You're like, oh, I'm just, so share all that with us and just talk about that journey as well.
Well, you know, it's like, here's the thing. I used to always say, and I still to this day say, like, I'm super introverted. And you'll never know how much of it is your true, it's like how much is it like your true personality and how much of it is trauma? Because if you get abused by enough people, you're going to feel like an introvert because you don't want to see any people. So for years and years and years, now I do think that I am introverted, but I was way more extremely, of an introvert. And so even though my mom in the living room had us praying and reading the Bible and sharing, it was like there was something in me like a tension, and it felt like I couldn't fully surrender to it. I remember seeing my other siblings speaking in tongues, crying, weeping, and I kind of had those experiences, but I never yielded fully. So then when I got to be 15 years old, that was when I finally got my own bedroom, which was like major, because that was like a big deal. So I finally got my own bedroom and I'm reading the Bible and I'm having these experiences privately because I was so like weird around people. Like if you would have met me as a teenager, I was super socially awkward and but if once you got to know me, I was funny, I was cool, I was excitable, but like until that, then I had like a layer of a shell. So, but then behind the scenes, I was like reaching out to God in this personal, intimate way. So finally, this one night, I was like, God, I want all of you. Like I want the Holy Spirit. I want it for myself. Forget about what my mom and all that. And I had like a personal Pentecost at 15, but I didn't tell anybody about it because I didn't want them to mess with me. You know, it's like once somebody knows you're on that level, then so I was like, I got to keep this thing to myself now. I certainly don't want to tell my mom or anybody else that I'm going to this next level. But then, and I've told this story all around the world, and I want to pause and say, like, I'm the least likely. I think you're the least likely. God has a way of just like, it doesn't make sense, but that's why it makes sense. Because I'm a nobody. You know what I mean? Like I'm a welfare kid from a trailer park with broken family. Wow. And so, but then I asked God, like, I want all of you. Can I have all of you? I have this personal Pentecost. And then I came out of church one Sunday and I was helping with the kids ministry. I'm 15 years old and we were in South Chicago. So this neighborhood was a Hispanic neighborhood. They had a little corner store here and then the church was here and then it was just houses. And so all of a sudden I used to come out of church because I wanted to be away from all the people. So as soon as they would dismiss, I would just run out the front doors and I would go sit on the steps that they had at the church. So I'm sitting on the steps and I'm kind of like just waiting for everybody to come out. And then this woman just comes walking down the street and she looks at me and she stops and she's like an older woman and she just like it almost like the color left her face, like she was absolutely shocked to see me. I'd never seen the woman in my life. And I'll never forget, she reaches out her finger and she was like, I had a dream about you. I never met you, but I had a dream about you. And you preached at my church and revival happened and the young people got saved. And she starts saying that. And I'm like starting to get real nervous. I'm sweating because I'm like, what is going on? Because, the introversion. And I'm just like, I stood up and this is what I said to her verbatim. I was like, woman, that dream was not about me. I try to back off on it. So for the next 6 weeks, she is going into the church every Sunday, going to my pastor and saying, when are you going to make him preach and make this dream come to pass? So I never booked my first sermon. I never postured myself. You know how people politic and I want to be a preacher. It was literally the opposite. Like it was just introverted Mike Signorelli with a whole bunch of junk in my trunk, a whole bunch of baggage, basically telling this woman who I thought was crazy, like, you didn't have a dream about me, leave me alone. Finally, about 6 weeks of this, every week she was super adamant. My pastor called me into the office with this woman and was like, okay, Mike, I want to deal with this now because you keep blowing her off, and he was like, I know that the pastor of the church that she attends. And she had already asked her pastor if I can do this like special service that she had a dream of. And he was like, the pastor said yes to it. Like, what, like, will you just tell her? And what he said, and it was kind of like this movie moment because now that I really think about it, because it was like what he said wasn't, I want you to do it. He was not affirming me. Yeah. He did the opposite. He was like, just tell her you can't do it. And there was something like when he said that, just tell her you can't do it. Tell her you're not a preacher. Tell her. And the more he was saying that, it just started enraging me. It was like and now I think it was a righteous anger. Yeah. And it was something inside of me like, no. And I remember I said, no, I'll do it. Wow. And after the words came out of my mouth, then I got even more scared because I'm like, did I just, and the room stopped. And so I agreed to do it. And I never forget, like we schedule, I don't remember the duration of time. It was like maybe a month or so later. But back in the day, this was like Pentecostalism. So you had to just preach in a suit. I didn't even own a suit. Wow. So like a guy from the church literally was like, hey, you're about the same size as me. I'll loan you my suit.
And you're 15.
I'm 15 years old and so I'm wearing this suit. It's too big for me. And I go into church. I've never
see that video.
Yeah. Oh, I wish it was on video actually. But I had never preached before in my life, other than the times my mom forced me as a kid to preach in the living room to my siblings. Wow. And I wasn't even really preaching, So anyways, I get up there super nervous. I'm like, my hand's shaking. And this is the way I remember it. The first 15 to 30 seconds was Mike Signorelli. And the rest of it was God.
Come on.
Like, I just showed up to the assignment, man. Isaiah, I'm telling you, bro, like, I get emotional even thinking about it. The best way I can explain it was like 15 to 30 seconds in, somewhere in that window. I'm stuttering. I couldn't do it. So my pastor was actually right. I don't want to dishonor him. He was right. Like, I couldn't do it. But it was like my spirit started moving faster than my body because I felt like I got struck by lightning. The same thing I did in Visalia, the same thing I did in Stockton, that's the same thing I did when I was 15. And that's when I got a revelation of what it means to have a gift because it's not a reward. Yeah. I didn't train for it. I didn't go to Bible college for it. I didn't earn it in any way. I just showed up and said yes because, dude, I started preaching beyond my years, beyond my biblical knowledge. It started flowing. And as it was flowing, all of a sudden I started watching people jump up out of their, this was like when they had pews back in the day and they're jumping up out of their seat and they're shouting me down. And I'm telling you, I felt like I was having an out of body experience watching myself do it. Wow. Because while it was happening, I was like, and then I got to the end and I started praying for people. And it was like, from that day on, I was the guy that you guys see me in this way in the area of preaching. The way I've always told the story is that I couldn't do it and then I could. It was just, but that woman, I mean, every year for the next several years, she would call me on the anniversary of that date to thank me, and I would thank her.
That's so crazy.
Because the young people of her church got saved. There was a miracle that happened in her daughter where her daughter's hand was healed, which was another fulfillment of something she saw in the dream. And so I think like for the people who are listening right now, it's really important to understand like you will play many different parts in life. Yeah. And it's like, think about how radical that woman's, and sometimes when I'm preaching in front of thousands of people and I'm doing what God called me to do, I think there was just some woman in South Chicago.
So crazy. Like, and where is she now?
I don't know. And I keep telling the story, like just hoping to God. No, I don't even remember her name because this was like 1998.
Reach out to us.
This was like 1998.
That's so crazy.
So it's like, and yeah, it's just one of those things where I've hoped that she comes out of the woodwork and was like, that was me.
Yeah.
Because I'd love to be reunited with her. But I think to myself,
so
like,
supernatural.
had it not been for her obedience, like sometimes you're the preacher, but sometimes you're the woman with the dream activating a preacher. You know, and so it all just matters so much.
Yeah. I wonder how many divine appointments we miss whenever we are going out and ignoring God. Someone said the sound went off. Hopefully it's working. But we ignore God when he says, go out and say this or go out and do this, or we have dreams of our friends or our family and we're disobedient. And our obedience could literally be the determining factor whether someone is a Mike Signorelli or somebody just never fulfills the call of God. Because it could have been she was disobedient and you just lived a normal life and never felt that calling to preach and never stepped out. So that's absolutely incredible. I also want to have you share the story you recently shared about your mom, something super, super significant has recently happened. And this goes all the way back from when you were young till now. Maybe people are watching thinking like, man, every miracle you guys pray for is instant. Everything you guys see happen is instant. God never takes time to do anything. And they see us pray for people, but it's not always instant. Yeah. And guys, if those of you watching this, like the prophetic words are not always instant. It's not always right away. Some of these things take years. Some of these things are prayer and fasting and in the word of God and showing up the church and stacking chairs and waiting on the promise. So maybe you're sitting here waiting on the promise of God saying, man, one day this is going to happen or one day that's going to happen. But I want you to share that story because it's absolutely incredible.
Yeah. So I started preaching at 15. I got invited to Bible clubs and schools, and I would go into the cafeteria and stand on the actual like tables and be like, I'm getting ready to preach in this other room. I mean, God, the favor of God was all over it. Like I would literally get asked to preach at Bible clubs and get driven by teachers to other schools during the school day to preach. It was just stupid stuff that God was doing that far exceeded, you know, and I started traveling a little bit to preach all before I was 18. So God was just using me in an incredible way. My nickname back in the day was literally Mighty Mike. And they were like, that was like, they would literally call me
Mighty. That in the chat.
Yeah, Mighty Mike. And I was just this little teenager and I was in the punk scene. So that was back in the day when Christian punk was a thing. So I like dye my hair crazy colors. And I was just radical. Like I believe God could do anything. And I would go all over just in the streets. You know, we were doing street evangelism. Like when I think about my teen years, it was just such a precious, like special time in my life. I really didn't fall off. Like I was righteous, you know, I really was consecrated. I was living that like Nazarite level life. And that was what my teen years were. And so my pastor didn't really know what to do with me. So this is the same guy that we mentioned. And so he put me over the intercession, which again, I see God's wisdom in that because yes, I was preaching a lot and God was opening doors, but it was being counterbalanced by prayer. And now that I've gotten older, I realize there's a lot of preachers who don't pray.
Yes.
And so I was over the intercession. So I would have all these adults from our church interceding, praying. I was reading Watchman Nee. I was reading Youngie Cho, and I was getting really deep into prayer ministry. Then at the same time, our little church, you know, in South Chicago gets an influx of these Puerto Ricans from Puerto Rico who were involved in witchcraft. And so we're praying for them and they start manifesting demons and we're doing what we think to do, but it's not really working.
Yeah.
So,
and what type of church was this? Were they doing deliverance or they did believe, don't believe?
It wasn't like it was a Pentecostal church, a Spanish Pentecostal church. Matter of fact, we were the white family in a Spanish speaking church. So they translate, the whole service was in Spanish and they would translate it to English for us.
Wow.
So just to give you an idea how weird my childhood and this whole story is. So yeah, it's a Pentecostal church. So they weren't anti-deliverance. They just weren't flowing in deliverance.
So many pastors watching are like that. They're like, we're not against it. We just don't do it.
Like if it spontaneously happened, they're going to try to cast demons out, but no one knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
So my mom and I at the time were watching this young guy who probably was the age I am now, in his 30s. Named Apostle John Eckhart, and we would watch him on local access cable or local access television. So like this was pre-YouTube, this is pre-Facebook. I'm talking, so back in the day, like my mom would actually go on the same channel. So it was local access Chicago television, and you could sign up for a slot.
Okay.
And so like my mom would go into the studio and she would be playing the piano and leading worship, or she would share something, and I would be back in the back room like slamming coffees, you know, and just
trying to get whatever snacks you could find.
Yeah. And so that was our thing. And so we remember watching this guy, John Eckhart, and his whole ministry was about demons.
Yeah.
So we thought like, let's reach out to him and he'll help us.
Yeah.
And he did. So he sends Apostle John Eckhart, him and his team comes to our little church, because back in the day in the area of Chicago where he was based out of, he would send teams into churches to develop and train and activate and all that. So they show up and they're like, okay, where's this guy, Mike Signorelli, that we're going to train? And so then
where's Mighty Mike at?
Yeah, there's this 15-year-old kid comes out, you know, with a mustache or whatever, you know, little,
where is this
just started
guy?
puberty, you know? And so I come out and they're like, it's you? And I'm like, yeah, this is me. and then my mom comes out, like single mom, you know, but this is why I absolutely love him and his ministry. They didn't despise me because of my youth.
Wow.
And I just, the more I even tell my story, you're like one of the few people who's even asked me my story.
Yeah.
So I don't tell it a lot. I just really teach the Bible.
Yeah.
But like, even the more I tell this story, the more revelation I get, because there's so many like twists and turns where it could have derailed.
Yeah.
But God was just, because like they could have just looked at me like, we're not going to waste our time with this kid.
Yeah.
You know, like we're going to train you. But it was like they treated me like a man. They were like, yeah, okay. And I'll never forget I'm going even deeper on my story. They didn't even do the training upstairs in the sanctuary. They did it in the basement because I was just the B team.
Yeah.
I was the intercession. You know what I mean? So it was like my pastor didn't even embrace it. He didn't even think it was a big deal that John Eckhart and his team was training us. It was like, oh yeah, he literally was like, yeah, go down they're in the basement.
That's crazy.
Think about that.
That's
so it was like,
crazy.
oh yeah, we're going to do.
I feel kind of convicted. I'm like, all these people that are like, can you help train me? I'm like, I could have been missing out on the next Mike Signorelli. No, but seriously though, because a lot of times we see people that want help and we don't see who they can become. We don't see that when we're preaching to these youth or crowds. Like there could be the next Reinhard Bonnke sitting in that room, or the next Billy Graham or whatever could be sitting there.
Yeah.
Does John Eckhart know to this day that you're a certified official grade A demon slayer? Like, is he like, wait, that's Mighty Mike Doolittle that I trained. You hear my wife laughing. That I trained in a basement, curly hair, you know, when you had hair, little Doolittle, because now look at you. Like, it's just crazy to me. I'm like,
we have talked about it.
That's so crazy.
Yeah, there was like a full circle moment where he followed me on Instagram, and I jumped in his DMs, and I was like,
so
Apostle,
crazy.
I need to tell you my origin story, because I don't think you even remember me.
Yeah.
And how could he, you know, because he's helped so many people. But
because I know he follows all of what we do. He follows the
Yeah.
demon slayers, everything that we're doing. So it probably trips him out that you were somebody he invested in and took time with. And that's for everybody in the chat that's watching this that are just like, oh, it's no big deal if I help people or if I pour into people. It's like, man, people matter. Like, people matter, and we need to reach out to people. We need to be better at that. So he comes to your church to train you.
Him and his team, yeah. And so because already he was operating in the apostolic back then in terms of he had leaders and structures. And I mean, they were bringing me through. I mean, it was do this and do this. You think about this. And I mean, we went right into the deep end of the pool. And so then my mom and I start trying it, and it works.
Yes.
And we're like, oh, wow.
You hear that, everybody watching?
Yeah. We're like, we went from like these demons wouldn't come out. They were super stubborn. People were not really getting free. It was taking like long time and no results, to like, we're demon slayers.
Wow.
Like I remember that switch, and it was like, wow, what John Eckhart's teaching us, it works. So then all of a sudden and then we start going deeper, and we're like, let's cast demons out of each other.
Come on.
You know, let's get
right there in the living room.
Yeah. So the first time I ever really experienced deliverance was I took John Eckhart's teaching and did them on myself.
Wow.
And I threw up in my bathtub, and it was like, I was like, wow, you know, because you have these disembodied personalities in your body.
Yeah.
You know, and you're like, that was not me.
Yeah.
And so I got videos on my YouTube channel telling that whole story, but I basically started vomiting. I threw up in my bathtub, cleaned it all up before my mom and them came home. And she was like, are you all right? Because my eyes were bloodshot. And I was like, I just did deliverance on myself.
So you did self-deliverance as your first real exposure.
I took the teachings I got from him, and I was like, I wonder what happens if you do this on yourself. Like, I wonder if I need to, because the more revelation I was getting, I'm like, I'm learning about generational curses. I'm learning about all this stuff. And I'm like, what if I need that? I remember having that thought, like, wait a second, because at first it was all about how do we get these people who are involved in witchcraft saved?
Yeah.
Or saved and delivered.
Yeah.
And then I'm thinking, maybe I need it. And then I tried it. I started manifesting demons. Then I start vomiting. And then before it was all over, I'm like, this is crazy. So I told my mom, and I just
you're like, Mom, what if you have demons?
Yeah, that's how
you start looking at everyone like, wait, this could be spiritual.
Yeah. So then it was like I remember doing deliverance on my mom, and she's on the floor, and I'm just like, this is crazy. This is my mom. She's normal. This is my mom. Like, what is happening right now? And so that's how it all. And I said this to you recently, but it was like the people who are faithful in their own living rooms are now being broadcasted into everyone's living rooms. Like, there's something about being faithful with little that he'll make you ruler over much. It's like, why can't you learn how to steward your own temple, and then God will allow you to deliver many other people's temples.
Yeah.
It's like there's something about that. Like, we were faithful with the carpet and the couch, and now we have the conference.
Come on.
So it's like, but we didn't start with the conference. We started with like, we're on the carpet doing this thing. We're on the couch doing this thing. And now we've graduated to the conference.
Come on.
But for me, that was it. So my teen years were.
I just want to touch on what you said there too, because a lot of people think that you just go viral and you have this huge platform. I literally remember when I had the vision, God said, you're going to preach to nations and go do all this stuff. And then I go to Starbucks at work and I'm like, okay, where's the nations? Like, I'm literally still working at Starbucks. I don't know anybody. I have no friends now. My little sister's like my only friend now, and one of her friends, and then my uncle. Like, and then I remember one day as I'm getting ready for Starbucks, I was like, you know what? This is my church. I'm going to put my apron on and I'm going to go preach to my 3 people, because we opened up at, I think, 4:30. So at 4, we would go and get the pastry case ready. So I'm like, okay, I have to do the pastry case. I have 2 coworkers, and this is my church. And I have 30-minute sermon, right? Because I can't be preaching while I'm working to my coworkers. So I'm going to have 30-minute sermon here to preach to them. And every single day I remember thinking, okay, this is my church. Okay, this is my church. And so people see the numbers and you're reaching this, but man, I started with 2 people at Starbucks, preaching to them, praying with them, ministering to them. And then God said, okay, now I can trust you with a small group, and 20 and 30 and 50 and 100. And so sometimes people's like, why isn't my thing growing? I'm like, because you're not stewarding the little God has given you. So many people are, I want to go to the nations. I'm like, you don't even go to your neighbor. Like, I want to go cast out devils. I'm like, you don't even share at Starbucks, right? We have these high lofty visions, and I'll die for God. I'm like, you won't even like live at all for him. So I think for so many people, God has taken us through this testing of, let's see what you can do with the 3 people I've called you to disciple. So don't despise, those of you watching, don't despise small beginnings with just being in a living room. I mean, that's where I started. People are like, I'm sorry, my church is small. I'm like, dude, I started in a living room. Like, I had people sitting on my feet preaching to them. But then God says, okay, if you can take care of the 2 people at work or the 3 people at work, then I can make you ruler over much. And so that's a principle I didn't want to skip on, because so many people think we just jump to viral, or we just got a big church and preach to crowds. I'm like, I literally preach to 2 before I preach to the masses.
Yes. Well, I always say slow success builds character, but fast success builds ego. And I thank God for my story. And, it's like that virality and the things that you talked about, like those are the things that just recently happened. But there was a lot of testing of my character over the course of my story. And it's like God's looking at what you're doing when the camera's not rolling.
Yes.
God's looking like, what do you do that carries no glory? Like, when I think back to my story, man, I never asked my pastor to schedule me to preach, because I would come out of church, go to my friend's house, we would eat lunch, and then we would hit the streets and just minister to anybody who would let us minister.
Wow.
And so I felt so satiated. I felt so fulfilled as a teenager. I didn't, so to me, it was like, it wasn't about itinerant ministry. It wasn't about a logo, a brand. It wasn't about 501c3 or wasn't what did that thing? It was, to me, it was about the lost. And so then when you put a camera on that, it'll go viral.
Wow.
But it's sustainable. It's the real thing. And I think for like people now, because people are like, how do I get blue checkmark verified? I'm like, you better get verified by heaven before you get verified by a platform. You know what I mean? Like, and so my thing is, what if you turn off the camera, do the things with no glory, and then when you turn it back on, find that God put some some of his anointing on it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and this is the one thing with the culture we live in where it's all viral. Everybody wants to go viral. Everyone wants it microwaved. It's like some food you have to actually cook it.
Yeah.
There's like, you can't have a 5-course grade A meal through the drive-thru, and everybody wants a drive-thru success story where I want to get it quick. And I'm like, man, imagine being like, oh, that was really good lobster. I got a Jack in the Box. Like, there's no one said no one ever, right?
Yeah.
These things take time. And so people want this instant success. And you see, we know a lot of guys, and some of them are watching, we love you, that have millions of followers, but they have no character.
Yeah.
They have no empathy. We talked about this. Like, there's no compassion because the character development was missing.
Yeah.
So we have an entire generation now that isn't building character, hasn't gone through the fire, is instantly going viral, but then we see them like shooting stars. They come out of the darkness, they're on fire, and then they go right back to the darkness. So like, we're trying to build platforms and people that are like with character and go through the fire and go through the trials, because that's what builds you. Like for me, it was the living room preaching. It was the hours and hours, 24/7 prayer that made me who I am now. It wasn't, oh, I had a viral video on TikTok. Like, that doesn't build character. That's easy. So I think we have this microwave, instant Instagram generation when God's like, I want you to plant, I want you to water, I want you to fertilize, this stuff takes time.
Yeah.
So very important to note, because a lot of people are just like, oh, I want it now. I want to be viral. I want to be. And then the other thing is like, what do you even have to say?
Yeah.
People want millions of views, and I'm like, what do you even have to say that millions of people need to hear? If it's not God telling you to do that, then I think a lot of people want to be viral just to be cool. But
yeah, well, so many people are like, when I watched your video, I cried. And it's like, yeah, because I ministered to so many individuals on the street that as you're releasing the word of God to them, you start to get in touch with their feelings, their emotions.
Yeah.
Like, you start to learn people. And so you can't escape that. I remember like in 2020, my wife, Julie, was like, Mike, you really need to go online.
Yeah.
Because I was super depressed because of the pandemic, and churches we were in New York City.
And you're in New York City.
Yeah, where I couldn't physically open our buildings because I don't own them. We're renting nightclubs and bars and all this stuff, and they physically wouldn't let me have church. And I remember telling Julie, I don't want to be a cringy, and this is the way I said it. I was like, I don't want to be this cringy influencer, hold my phone like, what's up, guys? You know, like,
welcome back to the vlog.
Yeah. Like, well, hey guys, what's up, man? And I was literally mocking it, being like, I don't want to be one of those mega church guys that's got like a deep V like shirt, like
all the way down to your belly button.
Yeah, like, you know, hey man, I'm just in the jacuzzi right now. Like, God gave me this word. And I remember telling you, like, I'm not that guy. And she said, that's why you need to go online, because you're not that guy. And she said, just do what you do in real life with a phone in front of your face and it'll work. Wow. And I remember finally getting to a point of desperation where I was like, all right, I'll try it. And I did. And it just, matter of fact, I do deliverance in real life. And I had not ever thought to do deliverance online.
Yeah.
I just didn't think about it. To me, deliverance from the late 90s on, all those years and years of doing it, it just happens in real life.
Yeah.
And then I woke up one day and I was like, I don't think the devil thinks I will cast demons out of people through my phone. That was the thought, which now I believe was a Holy Spirit thing. And so I jumped on my phone and I just started doing deliverance. I was like, I put in the description, it was like Facebook. And so I was like, if you want deliverance, jump on the chat. And I thought I was like making this thing up. I didn't know there were guys like you and other people really doing this. And so and then I remember reading the comments and it was like, I'm throwing up right now. I'm driving my car.
On Facebook.
On Facebook. I had to pull over because I'm puking. I can't stop coughing. Why am I yelling? Why am I yelling? Why am I screaming? Why am I yawning? And I was like, I remember being amazed. And this is where the grace came though. I had been going live that whole week and I talked about different topics. I had 80 people on, 90 people, 100 people. The day I woke up and decided deliverance, I'll never forget. Well, I'm going in, people are like, I'm puking, I'm throwing up. And then the number just starts going 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800. And I think I hit like 800 or 900 that day.
Wow.
And I remember it just kept climbing. And then I hit the end, I was covered in sweat. And then it was like, I just came back and I'm like, I'm in my living room. Like I was gone spiritually.
Yeah.
And then I just said, okay, I'm going to do that tomorrow. And I just kept going every single day during the pandemic, and that started that new era. But to your point, it was like my goal wasn't, oh, I could use deliverance as a gimmick to reach more people and go viral.
Yeah.
It was literally like, wait a second, I've set so many people free through the ministry of deliverance through Christ. What if I just do this through my phone?
Yeah.
So like my end game was, how many people can I set free? Not how many people can I get to watch me?
Do you feel like, it feels like sometimes with deliverance, I think the devil does this where you get super passionate about seeing people free, do deliverance, and then like a year or two goes by and it becomes like in the background. Like you're not emphasizing on it. You're not really talking about it. You're seeing people do it sometimes, but you're definitely not preaching about it. I feel like for me, a lot of times through the 12 years, it's been that way where I was like deliverance starting in my living room. And then after a while, it would kind of just wear off and then I'd preach it again. And I feel like the devil constantly wants us to just put deliverance in the back room, kind of be quiet about it. But here you are now, you start seeing you're doing deliverance, I'm doing deliverance. You see Pagani, you see Vlad, everyone, it's like starting to just pop off. Everyone's starting to do deliverance. I got that word at probably the same time as you in August of 2020, where God's like, train my church. They're not trained. And now it seems like, listen, when I go on TikTok or Instagram or Facebook or YouTube and see a new guy talking about deliverance, I love it. I'm not like, oh, bro, this is our thing. Like, bro, you're the new kid on the block. I'm like, dude, I want everyone to be preaching this and doing this and seeing this. This is the works of Jesus. So do you feel like seeing everyone doing it like reignited a passion in you for deliverance? Or were you always just like deliverance all the time throughout the years of ministry, like getting up to that point?
I've always had a constant thread of deliverance.
Okay.
So there was never a time where I'd back down.
Okay.
But there were times where it was more of a backroom thing.
Yeah.
Or if it was more at an altar or whatever.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, but you know what too, and there's probably many people watching, I had prophetic dreams of doing deliverance, and I had prophetic dreams of mass deliverance. And I think I've seen a pattern where if somebody is specifically called to like that next level of deliverance, and all of us are called to do deliverance.
Yes.
But I do think that some of us carry a grace to where it's just another magnitude of it.
Yeah.
And it's like, we're supposed to strengthen and like fortify the body in this area. And so I started having reoccurring dreams of mass deliverance. Matter of fact, I started having dreams that I was in like stadium style seating and I could look up into the balconies, and I wasn't being put in places to do that. And the venues were not matching up, the venues and the visions.
Yeah.
Like if I was going to preach it good, but like the visions I was having from God and the venues were not aligning. And then I remember all of a sudden they did. And I would be standing in a place, and the Lord would bring back a prophetic dream and say, now you're standing in that venue. Now do what I told you to do. Wow. And so I think it's like, for me, the ministry of deliverance has to become normal.
Yeah.
It has to be just like, I'll put it like this, man. And I'm going to be a little mean right now, but almost 100% of churches in America, if you say, pray for me, I'm sick, they will pray for healing.
Yeah.
Why will that same thing not happen in the area of deliverance?
Yeah.
Like I want to get to the point where like it's mainly churches will do deliverance.
Yes.
And so I think that that's what you're feeling right now, because healing and deliverance should be equally weighted.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like
And
salvation, healing, deliverance, these things were all happening equally.
And I think removing the taboo of like, oh, it's a demon, I'm scared. Like you have these pastors out here that are, let's like just be honest, they're hirelings, they're soft, right? John 10 says they run from the wolf. And the moment anything supernatural happens or somebody manifests, they're just like, oh, we don't want to deal with that. We're really just like scared of it. Like it's gross. But to me, the only person that would make you mad about deliverance, because a lot of pastors will talk about are mad about deliverance happening. Like, let's just be honest. Some of them are in the chat. They're just mad about deliverance happening. But the only one that was mad about deliverance in the Bible was the devil. Like, think about it. The only one that was mad was the religious people, and the religious people were being used by the devil. Jesus told them, hey, by the way, your father's not Abraham. Your father's the devil. Like, Jesus told her, think about the religious people that. And so in Mark 1, Jesus comes to a synagogue. A man starts manifesting, screaming. So here's a religious guy in a synagogue with a demon screaming, have you come to destroy us? Like, mad at Jesus for doing deliverance. Yeah. So when a pastor comes like, I hate that you guys do deliverance, I'm like, or is it the thing living in you that hates it?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, or is it the personality in you? Because really, hatred for deliverance is demonic.
Yes.
Fear of deliverance is a demon. So, man, there's these pastors out here that are just letting the devil use them and persecute the ministry of Jesus. Like, that's the end of the day. The foundation is This is not my ministry, your ministry, someone's ministry. This is the ministry of Jesus. And so if I was a pastor that hates deliverance, I would go get delivered. Yeah. I'd be like, I hate this because I have a demon in me. And so I'm going to go get this demon cast out of me. And it would probably be better just to do it right in front of your congregation. Like, hey, I'm the first one as a pastor here to get delivered. Because at the end of the day, like, Jesus loved casting out demons. Yeah. If he didn't love it, he wouldn't have done it everywhere he went. Yeah. And he did it to prove that he was the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the ultimate authority, not a political savior, not a political redeemer, not a political deliverer, but a spiritual redeemer, a spiritual deliverer. And so it's just, it blows my mind from the most basic sense. I think in my mind, how could you preach 52, I know I'm going off on a tangent here, and I'm looking at the chat. How could you preach 52 times per year and never even mention deliverance? Like, Jesus did this everywhere he went, yet we have so many leaders and pastors that never talk about it.
Right.
So, and I think we have to go from even like some that will just preach on it once in a while, because it's really hard to not if you preach the Gospels, but be like, man, I want to see this happen today. Like, I want to see Jesus do deliverance today. And so I think we're seeing this explosion. And I also think a lot of pastors are like, we're just not going to win this battle. Let's just do deliverance. You know what I'm saying? Like, we're not going to win, because they've been saying, we're going to keep deliverance secret. Now we have a movie coming out in March about deliverance, and we're posting about it. It's going viral. All the people want to see it. All the people are seeing it, and they're going back to their church, and their pastor's like, well, I guess we're just going to have to give in. And that's a great thing to happen, because at the end of the day, like, God's going to do it with or without you. So you can either be a spectator or participant.
Yes.
So anyways, I think I'm super excited about deliverance going viral. I'm super excited about all these young guys that are doing it. I'm cheering them on. I'm like, let's go for it. There's no corner on the market. Like, we all need to be doing deliverance.
Yeah. Well, you know what the saddest thing is? While you were explaining that, I was thinking, so in my story, you've got people who come from Puerto Rico who are demonized.
Yeah.
Then we learn from Apostle John Eckhart how to cast demons out of people, and we do it.
Yeah.
And then from 15, 16, 17, 18, I'm casting demons out everywhere. And so, like, think about this. If without any influence from other denominations, from the seeker-sensitive movement, just based on my experience in real life, and then coupled with just what you read in the Bible at face value, deliverance was normal.
Yes.
So in my world, deliverance is normal. And so what I'm reading in Scripture in Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, it's happening in real life. Yep. And so my default mode is, yes, this is what's supposed to happen.
Yes.
It really wasn't until I got ordained at the very first church that I was officially ordained that I realized people were against deliverance. And I traveled within circles. Yeah, come on.
We see some of you.
Yeah. And it was like I traveled in circles so there's two places that I kind of operated in. Amongst the lost, like, lost people won't tell you deliverance doesn't exist.
No.
Isn't it weird
how they don't hate it?
Lost
like,
people
we
will tell you
something happen.
Yeah, lost people who don't know Christ will tell you there is something evil in my life. I have had experiences with evil. I do feel like a foreboding presence. I think I did see shadow people. I think I did. Oh, something did get on top of me in the middle of the night. Like, lost people never rejected the ministry of deliverance. Right. I went all over the world and preached in crazy countries and places, and lost people were like, oh yeah, there's evil stuff out there that I need to get free from. Maybe it's in me, maybe it's on me, maybe it's around me. That's how lost people sound. Then there's many other churches that will embrace it. But then all of a sudden, when I was in my early 20s, I encountered more like the seeker-sensitive movement.
Yes.
And that's when it was like, I realized I'm the weird guy to them.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, so you're all wearing bracelets that say WWJD, and I'm doing what Jesus did, but I'm weird. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, but Jesus never did most of the stuff that you call ministry, but I'm doing something that he did as a part of his ministry. And I remember the pastor that I had at the time, he shut me down in deliverance. And it was a very weird experience for me. And I'm trying to submit. And so some of you guys listening right now are probably going through this right now, where you're like, I'm trying to submit, I get shut down.
So what do you just call you in your office? Hey, we need to talk. You're doing what Jesus did. And at this church, we don't like doing the things that Jesus did. I mean, because it sounds funny, but that's literally what you're saying. You're literally saying, like, you're doing the things and it's a testimony to the fact that we've gone so far from biblical Christianity that biblical Christianity looks like a cult. Like, when you do the things Jesus did, and they actually called Jesus a cult leader. They said, you're leading a cult. And so I tell people, hey, if you think I'm in a cult, don't rescue me.
Right.
Because this cult has changed my life, my family, my marriage, my kids. It's restored my mind. When I wasn't in the cult, I was depressed, I was anxious, I was suicidal, I was lost. But then Jesus saves me, and now that I'm radical, and what's crazy is too, is like once you become radical, and the chat is gonna love this because they're like, that's my life, it's weird how all the people that you didn't even know were Christian because they never ministered to you, witnessed to you. They were just friends, family, cousins, aunts, and uncles. You get radically saved and become a Christian, start seeing deliverance and miracles. Everyone that never ministered to you start calling you, oh man, I think you've lost your mind. It doesn't take all that. And it's like, dude, you were never there when I was broken and hurting. You were an undercover Christian. Now that I'm doing deliverance and on fire, now you want to show up in my life and tell me I'm crazy. So you got fired basically for being on fire. And Leonard Ravenhill said, listen, Leonard Ravenhill said something like, you're not ever in true revival until you get fired for being on fire. But this is something we hear all the time of pastors being like, we don't like this. Stop. Right? Like you're doing too much of what Jesus did. So what happened? He calls you in the office?
You're like actually encouraging me. I was fired for being on fire. Well, at the time, man, it was like, so we were now in Portage, Indiana. So we're back in Northwest Indiana, and I had just graduated from college, came back. I married Julie. Now I'm attending this church. They honored the gifting that I had, and they saw that God was using me. And so they're like, so one thing I will say is the lead pastor did ordain me. Now you're officially a pastor. And so we had a heart for young people.
Yeah.
And so my wife was like, had this vision. We're going to get this van, this huge van, and we're going to go into the trailer parks, and we're going to go into these crazy places and pick these kids up for church. So it was just, Julie and I were just leading all these kids to Christ. And our ministry's growing. And as a matter of fact, like our youth group at that time started getting as big as the actual adults of the church. I mean, it was just, we were filling up a whole section. These kids would come, we would pick them up from trailer parks. They would stink. I mean, no running water, some of them, utilities shut off. And these kids needed freedom. They needed deliverance. And we were doing the work. And so there was some tension between my pastor and I because I was rocking the boat. My mom was doing deliverance in the women's ministry. So we were like the bane of their existence. It always breaks out
everywhere but the main place. Yeah. So it's like happening in all.
Right. And then these people now are getting free saying, why don't we do this on Sunday? Why doesn't this happen here? So I was the bane of their existence. My mom's agitating, irritating these demons. And here's the thing, though. The Lord had given me a prophetic word about some things happening privately in his life. And I confronted him about it in a closed room setting and was basically told, I'm going to punch you in your face.
Wow.
Which now I know was a manifestation.
The pastor told you that?
Yeah, I mean, he jumped up.
Might be watching. It's okay, though. Yeah, it happened.
Praise God. We've reconciled since this story, but now I realize he manifested.
So he told you I'm going to punch you. You're a pastor.
He said more than that. I'm giving you the YouTube
we don't
friendly.
Have the beat button.
Yeah, like I'm giving you the YouTube friendly version. Literally, he changed. He went, and now the thing is, the whole church had known him as this benevolent, kind, generous man. He's an incredible preacher. He was very well loved. He had no scandals. And so then all of a sudden I'm in this closed door setting and I speak to him prophetically and I say, the Lord showed me that there's some things in hiding. He's giving you an opportunity to deal with it or it's going to be exposed. He jumps up. He's like, you bleepity bleep, bleep, bleep. I'm going to punch you in the face, da, da, da. And he just starts manifesting. And so I come back out of that meeting and I tell my wife, well, it didn't go that well.
Wow.
I'm like, but the good news is I saw what I needed to see and we're leaving this church. And Julie might be watching now. But she didn't, this guy was such a father in the faith to her.
Yeah.
That Julie was like, no, we're not leaving the church. It couldn't have been that bad. And maybe you didn't hear from God. So Julie's like, maybe you didn't hear from God. I'm like, come on, girl, you're my wife.
Yeah.
You better
the pastor's about to beat me up.
Yeah. I'm like, the dude almost swung on me. Like, I don't know how much you need. Like, did I need to get hit for you to believe it?
Yeah.
So, but it wasn't that. It was just more of like, there's something going on.
Yeah.
So then we leave. And then, to be honest with you, everyone in that church was like, Mike didn't see it. He's a false prophet, da, 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 da. And that's why when these clout chasing heresy hunters make videos,
clip this for
you
sure.
weren't the first. Like, if you're watching right now, can I just I will look into the camera and tell them you're not the first person to call me a false prophet.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, we've earned our stripes before we got to YouTube. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And, anyways, but people like by the hundreds were like, Mike didn't see it. He's wrong. This guy's the greatest guy, da, da, da. But then within a duration of time, everything did come out.
That you said that God showed you was doing, he was doing.
Yeah.
It all came out.
Oh yeah. I mean, in the form of like blackmail, like here's the pictures, here's the messages, it's printed out, it's in manila envelopes. Like, I mean, he got checkmated. Like, you can't hide from this. It's all, so he basically now all of a sudden, all those same people who call me a false prophet are now like, what church does Mike go to? And he was right. And why didn't we listen and all that? So it was a validating story, but at the same time, it hurts to go through that stuff.
Yeah.
So he dismissed the ministry of deliverance, discredited me, matter of fact, at the time where he did say all those things that he said to me, was clearly doing the things that
that you said he was doing.
That he was doing. And so, but that's kind of where my story takes like a kind of a plot twist because, I told you about.
Did you ever reconcile with this pastor or ever see him again?
Later on, yeah, I'll get to that in a second. Okay. But so here's the thing. So I'm this young ordained minister. I'm fatherless. My mom and dad divorced. You guys know that part of the story. My mom was divorced and remarried multiple times. I had abusive stepdads. Now all of a sudden, I'm this young ordained minister, and this guy that I look to as like my spiritual father, he all of a sudden goes through infidelity, financial impropriety, all that. So he has a fall, and I just start coming unglued because I think there was just something about. And for somebody watching right now, maybe this will help you. I felt like, man, there are no real ones. Wow. Like it's all fake. There aren't, and I remember just feeling like, and I felt like this injustice of life just doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. It's all a sham. It's all fake, and I remember, and then I was struggling in my marriage with Julie. It's hard being married.
Yeah.
Like young married couple, and we were in ministry, but then now I gave up, and I think I was mourning the loss of like all those kids. I wasn't their pastor anymore because we left the church, and then that pastor fell, and then another pastor fell, and literally all the pastors that raised me up in faith, their marriages were all dissolving. So I remember at that time just feeling like this, just none of this stuff makes sense. So I started. So now I'm not functioning as a pastor. I'm in my early 20s. We had just had our daughter. So this is about 15, 16 years ago now. And all this stuff's dissolving. And I just start getting incredibly mad at God. So then I was like, well, I'm trying to fix it in my own self-will. So I remember trying to deal with this. So I start reaching out to other guys I didn't know for relationship, mega church pastors, guys on Twitter at the time, because that was like Twitter was kind of a newer thing, or, like these platforms were emerging. And so in those years, I'm reaching out to these guys, and they're not really reciprocating, and I had like an orphan wound. Yeah. And so like I started building this really toxic persona. Matter of fact, I'm not even going to say the name of it, but I had a website and everything where it's like, I thought that God called me as this like prophetic voice to the body of Christ to like just basically expose and out people. Wow. And because it was like, okay, I don't have a church. I'm not ordained anymore. I'm not Pastor Mike anymore. I'm going to be this persona. Yeah. And so I started making it my job to literally call out stuff in the church and pastors. And I mean, it was ruthless. Wow. So then I started growing online. Like I had this website getting crazy hits. I was like a blogger. Okay. So I was like that.
Well, you're like an OG heresy hunter.
Yeah.
So you were a heresy hunter before there were heresy hunters.
Yeah. Wow. And I literally thought I was doing the right thing. Wow. Like I thought but you know what it was? I was this fatherless, orphaned, hurting guy who was reaching out to these pastors who, now that I realize how busy a pastor could be, and how prioritized, like they just, I wanted something from them that only God could give. Wow. I'm trying to find the words. That's the best way I can explain it. Like what I realized was like, even if those pastors would have met with me and had coffee with me every day, it was not going to fill that void. It was not going to heal me. So then, but I didn't know that at the time. Yeah. So I've got this persona. I've got this website. I'm calling out pastors like all over the world. I'm blasting people. And what I realize is when you're hurting and you start calling out people, you become the hero of all the orphans. Yes. So I was like the hero of all the orphans. I was like Rufio, in Never Neverland, leading all the lost boys, like, but none of us are men. We're all boys. And that's how I look at like a lot of these heresy hunters and stuff now. It's like, dude, you're Rufio.
Yeah.
Like you're just leading all of the other orphans.
People that are hurting the church.
Yeah, you're all boys in Never Neverland. None of you are real men of God. You're just boys. And so, you know how I know? Because I was one of them. But then here's what's crazy. Then I start getting into Reformed theology and their intellectualism, which now it's a form of pride because I felt insignificant. I felt like I needed to prove my worth. So I'm going to learn the scriptures. I'm going to read an 800-page book of theology because you won't do it. I'm going to be able to quote chapter and verse. So again, when I see these heresy hunters now, I'm like, dude, I already played that play. You know, because what it is the pride of life that says, I'm going to carry more value the more intellectually you perceive me. So at the time, I already had an English degree. You know, I already had kind of been in academia. So when I found Reformed theology and Acts 29 Network and Piper and all these guys, the Gospel Coalition, I was like, oh, that's my tribe. These dumb Pentecostals. But really what it was all emotional. It was all wounds, but it was masquerading as intellectualism. So I go on that journey. Then I find out that the Reformed community has Christian liberties. So I'm like,
go there.
I'm like, wait a second.
Come on,
like,
let's talk about it.
Maybe I interpreted the scriptures wrong. Like, yeah, you can drink and not get drunk and blah, blah, blah. And the enemy was just like, I got you. Wow. And so I literally would have Bible studies. So this was Mike Siggs of back in the day, like 15 years ago now, 16 years ago. I would ask local bars if I could use their space to do Bible studies. And I had a thing called Theology on Tap. And I would actually, this is me, dude. No. I'm telling you. And I would actually have people come into the bars, and there would be all these dudes. And it was BYOB, you know, but like, you know, because we would come in and have these like bring a craft beer. We were nerds, dude. And it was like, you know, we'd bring our own glass. It was a thing. So now here's me saying I believe in Christian liberties getting totally trashed. Every single one of us getting trashed. And Julie's watching me go from Mighty Mike, you know, bringing it full circle, Doolittle, Demon Slayer, to like drunk out of my mind with a Bible in my hand.
What?
So my wife's trying to warn me, saying like, you got this website getting crazy hits. And back in the day, that it's like, you know, and you're blogging about all these guys, you're bitter. You're jealous. Wow. You're coveting their ministries, and you know, because it was basically like I would hear these stories of like second generation preachers and pastors, like, oh, my dad, and it would just hurt me, dude. So then all of a sudden, my wife's watching me transform into this alcoholic preacher without a pulpit. And people right now are probably getting like...
They're all saying wow in the chat.
Yeah. So I'm coming home. I'm stumbling home from my Theology on Tap Bible studies with all these other guys. And I'm starting to evolve into this guy. And my wife's like, this is not the guy I married. This is not the real you. And I'm like, it is me. And I was this stupid Pentecostal charismatic guy. And now I'm this. And then all of a sudden... in the midst of that, I have this thought of I'm going to reach out to my dad, my biological father, to have a relationship with him.
Wow.
Because I'm going to reconcile, because I'm trying to figure out how to heal all this. So I'm trying through theology and intellectualism. I'm trying it through the, you know, relationships, reaching out to these other guys. And then I'm like, I'm going to reach out to my dad. So I go to reach out to my dad, and I end up finding out that he had died, and I didn't even know.
Wow.
So like no one invited me to the funeral. Nobody told me my dad died. So I literally like find out my dad died. Like, and then I look up the obituary, and I'm not even listed as one of his kids.
What?
So it's like, so you take all this pain. And so here's where that part of my story, I remember thinking like, okay, God, I'm definitely not going back to atheism. You know, I know you exist, but I hate you. Like it was like you're not a good God. And I remember actually feeling like my dad's dead. I'll never have a relationship, because there's something about like when your dad dies, it's like whatever fantasy you have of like, I'm going to have this relationship with him and we're going to redeem it. Because I had built up this big fantasy of like, there's going to be, you know, Mike Signorelli Sr. with Mike Signorelli Jr. and we're going to reconcile and God, whatever. And when I found out he was dead, the dream died of that. All that died with him.
Wow.
So my whole thing. So now all of a sudden the door's wide open to alcohol. I'm already getting drunk. Now I'm super depressed because my dad's dead. I've got this 1-year-old kid. My pastor now is a cheater. All these guys. I mean, my whole
Everything's
world
falling apart.
collapsed. So then I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to live. And I think there's two forms of suicide. There's instant and there's progressive. And some people, they won't do it immediately, but they'll do it over. And I was like, I'm not going to kill myself, but I'm going to live like a perpetual daily, like killing myself. And so I started drinking crazy and I started just coming completely unglued. And I'm not proud of this at all. I mean, this is probably the darkest part of my story. And so one day after all of this, now I start inappropriate conversations with women.
Yeah.
All that. It starts, and you start playing the game.
Yeah, you
it's
go
not
down that road.
Yeah, it's not full on relationship yet, but it's flirting. It's this. Now you're doing this. It's like it starts growing and I'm feeding this stuff and I'm spiraling out of control. And people are even hearing stories like Mike Signorelli is, drinking and Mike Signorelli this. And they're like, no, like people couldn't. But it's just was like slowly happening, and then all of a sudden, I start, I'm angry, I'm breaking stuff in the house, I'm just literally coming unglued, and I'll never forget. One day I come home, and I'm drunk out of my mind, and my actual thought was like, man, Julie cleaned the house good today. Like, Julie really cleaned the house, deep cleaned this house. I woke up the next day sobered up and realized it's not that she cleaned the house, she left. Wow. And took all her stuff with her and took Bella's stuff with her. Like my wife left me. I was so drunk, I didn't even realize she was gone. Just to give you an idea. So then, you would think my wife and my kid are gone. Now I'm going to change. But when you're as wounded and orphaned and fatherless and broken, what you actually do is you sabotage more because you say, oh, I get it. My wife doesn't even want to be there for me anymore. Now my pastor wasn't there for me. The mega church pastor wasn't there for me. My friends, now you're like, oh, it just proved it.
Yeah.
So you would think my story gets better. It actually gets worse. Then I'm like, okay, Julie, you're going to leave me? Now I'm going all the way in. And I remember actually praying these crazy demonic prayers where I was like, you know what, God, like I'll go to hell now.
Wow.
Like I remember actually and you know what it is? And for those of you who are like, this is super extreme, I can't believe this is happening. Like, here's the thing. And some of you might be like, no, actually, this is the realest thing I've ever heard because I've been there.
Yeah.
But you know what it is? It's like when you are, and I keep saying the word orphan, because when you truly are an orphan, you don't believe that your adoptive parents are actually going to be any different than the ones who abandon you.
Wow.
So when God adopts you, you're like, I know you said you'll never leave me nor forsake you, but you are going to forsake me. It's like, because that's how an orphan. Matter of fact, I remember Josh Hamster, our executive pastor at V1, we were having this conversation and he actually trained to take kids into his home. He wanted to be an adoptive parent.
Yeah.
And he said, like, sometimes they were saying in the training that when you adopt like an older child, you never give them a time out, give them a time in. And they said, like, you sometimes even have to embrace them and just physically hold them and be like, I'm not going to let you go because I'm not going to prove to you that I'll abandon you because of bad behavior. Wow. Until you break that thing off of them mentally. And I think like it's almost like in a way I was like wrestling with God.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I just, that's how I look at it now. So I went on a dark path, man. I went from Reformed theology, drinking, Christian liberties into just full on abysmal, like black abyss of sin.
Wow.
And Julie had left me at that point. And so as that stuff was going on, multiple infidelities, my house literally transformed into the party house. I'm playing music in a band. And I'm just out there. And it really was like, I don't care what the consequences are because I don't want to live anymore. I don't care what it is. And just everything completely was undone.
Wow. And how old were you at this point?
In my early 20s.
Now, what point were you an atheist? What part of your story was you decided God's not real, I don't believe?
So it was before that. So what happened in my story, and I know we kind of skipped around, but good. I went from like this Mighty Mike teenage preacher guy, and then I ended up, I basically started college early.
Okay.
And so similar story to yours.
Yeah.
So I started college early. Like I tested out of a whole bunch of stuff. I got a free ride scholarship because of my scores. I've always been intelligent. I've been able to do whatever, like school was easy for me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Skipped up multiple times or whatever. So I start college when I'm 16 turning 17. So, which was kind of part of my story. And then when I got to college, I was the first generation college student on both sides of my family.
Wow.
So, I come from a trailer park, dude. So then I get into this like whole college world, and these people, like these professors, it's the cliche of God's not dead, like that plot. Like they were these. I had a girlfriend at the time who was a pre-med well scholar. So she had actually scored a perfect on her SATs. She made national news. She was super genius level intelligence. So I was like, I wanted to spend more time with her. So I started taking classes with her. So I'm in these biology classes and they're saying, God doesn't exist. Like the cliche of the movie, like literally. And I was at Indiana University. And so I remember at first it wasn't full-blown atheism because I was like, my faith is strong, blah, blah, blah. But just being in the world, and I do believe that like if Satan had a church, it would be like the universities and the schools of America. Wow. You know what I mean? Because like you get fully indoctrinated into secular humanistic worldview. You get fully indoctrinated into it's crazy. Yeah. And it's like me being this like anointed, powerful preacher as a teenager going into Indiana University. It was like me versus 30,000 kids who worship the devil. Wow. But they don't know it because they think they're living their own life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like I felt the pull in the colleges, and then the professors were like, they were all atheists. So then I remember the seed that was forming in my mind was, I wonder if and this is how it started. I wonder if smart people don't believe in God and dumb people do. And then I started thinking like, well, my family, they were well-meaning, good people, but they were just poor people because I come from the culture of the poor on both sides of my family, working class, blue collar, poor people. So my thought was like, oh, I get it. Working class, normal people, they believe in God because it gives them hope. It makes them feel better. It brings structure to their life. But then the smarter you are, the less you believe in God. And then all these people who are professors must be the most smart. So therefore they're the least, you know what I mean? And so that was kind of how it started. And so that's where the atheism for me started.
How long did that last for? A few years? A
few years, because then this is where God's stories like threaded in my life. So I started this thing my freshman year on campus, the second semester, called Spirituality Talks.
So you went from atheist, you went from casting out devils, preaching, then you became an atheist, and then you became a new ager.
Pretty much. Like I never really like identified it as new age, but it wasn't
popular back then.
Yeah, like
popular.
Because here's why. So I know I'm skipping around a lot, but
it's all good.
I never went on vacation my whole life up to this point. I've never traveled.
Okay.
So you got to understand, my whole life was in one region.
Yeah.
So now I'm in IU Bloomington, Indiana University. I'm in a Big Ten with kids from all these countries, all these different. And so now I'm like, well, what do you believe? So that's how it started. Like I lived in a dorm and I'm like, well, what do you believe and why do you believe it? And so I started this thing called Spirituality Talks, and I'm like, let's get together and let's talk. So we had Hindus, Muslim, atheist, agnostic, everything.
Yeah.
And we're all on our dorm floor. Then it keeps growing. Then kids are straight up crying, trying, I don't know what I believe. And it's like this weird spiritual therapy where people are like, well, I came from a Muslim family, but I never felt like I fit in. So then this thing just keeps growing on campus. So then I get approached after that year, as I was ending the freshman year, I get approached by my resident assistant on the dorm. And he was like, hey, I was telling my boss about all these kids coming to here, and you guys are doing these conversations. Would you consider talking to him? He has this idea. So I talked to him and he's like, hey, we want to train you this summer to come back next year and teach it as an electives course where you go to each cultural center on campus and you learn about the different world religions.
Wow.
So then my sophomore year, I literally was on, you could sign up to take a class by me as this like volunteer junior professor as a world religion survey. So we would go to the Jewish Cultural Center, then we would go to the Islamic Cultural Center, and I would tour all these places, and we would learn about all the world. So I read the Hindu Vedas, I read the Quran multiple times. I started learning all this stuff obsessively because I wanted to know what was true. And then when I read the Hindu Vedas, I was like, oh, this is scientifically inaccurate.
Yeah.
Or then when I read the Quran, I read the English translation of the Quran, and there's crazy verses about, the gestation period of a baby and just stuff that's not scientifically accurate. So now as like this atheistic, kind of like new age-ish dude, I'm like, well, I definitely don't believe in Islam.
Yeah.
I definitely don't believe in, Hinduism. So I'm ruling stuff out, but I had not been able to rule out Christianity totally. So then my story was junior year, I go to move into this house. This is like crazy. I go to move in this house and there's 4 bedrooms. So I'm going to move into one of those rooms. So I have 3 roommates. One of the guys who moves in randomly, I'm saying this in air quotes, is an Ivy League educated theologian.